Yeah, so I'm excited to have Jill here today. And we will have another live class on biosphere stewardship, which will be our second to last class on Thursday. And there's a Dropbox up for those of you that want me to look at your rough drafts of your final papers, that if you can get it in over the weekend, then I'll try to turn it around so that you have time to work on it again and for the final drafts. So I don't want to take up a lot more time other than that. And many of you were here for Jill's last class, but Jill's a choreographer and she runs a dance company called Think Dance, and we've taught together in the past and use emergency creative campus initiative funds to bring Jill to work with us. And so she has been also, she's familiar with the readings that we've been discussing on justice and indigeneity and equity. And this is also something that is very connected to your own interests and work. And so I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you, Jill, and let you do what you had planned for us.
Cool, thank you. And hopefully, I just want to say my internet connection seems a little wonky, so I think there's a lag. It's probably my fault. I apologize, and I hope I don't lose you guys. So yeah, I mean, Helen told you a bunch of things already, and I've met most of you, but just to kind of round that out a little bit, I'm a choreographer, a movement artist, interdisciplinary artist. I spend a lot of time working with things that people throw away, things that we call garbage, kind of plants that we call weeds, things that people have deemed to be like not of value, and thinking about what that means and how we can revalue those things and change our perception of them and change our relationships with them, and how that means we change our relationships also with land and the natural world and each other. I'm calling in now from Manhattan, from Lenape land, occupied Lenape land. And today, I don't know, we're gonna work on a number of different things. I remember that last time I met with you all, people were also just really tense, and like your bodies were feeling the effects of the situation that we're in. So we're gonna start with just a little tiny warm up just to get you in your bodies and hopefully feeling a little bit better. And then we'll move on. I'm glad to see most of you, even though you're tiny pixelated thumbnails for me, but it's really nice to like kind of meet you in this way. And I'd like to invite you, if it's possible, I know a lot of us have problems with bandwidth, but if possible to be on camera just to help me kind of share the work of holding space for us, and to sort of simulate this feeling of trying to be in the same space at the same time. Because I don't feel like what I do is a product that I can kind of like, you know, put out there in this little quantum for you to consume in the void. I want to try to feel like we're having some sort of dialogue in some way, even if it's not a verbal one. So, so welcome, and thank you for helping me with that. And let's just begin with a little bit of moving. I don't know if you're feeling any different from last time we spoke, but you know, we've all been kind of cooped up for a while, and I'm guessing that your bodies may be feeling that. So can we just start shaking out a little bit? Let's start with the hands like we did last time. Just shake your hands. You can shake with me. I can tell how long the lag is by how long people don't shake. So it's like seeing birds on the screen, all these different birds fluttering together, and you can shake in different directions. What about if you shake forward or toward you? And can you shake them separately to the sides? And can you shake upward? And if you can't hear me when I move away from my computer, just let me know, okay? You can unmute, tell me things if you need to. And can you shake down, the hands down toward the ground? What happens if you shake them lower? How does that feel? Maybe your shoulders shake. And let's do some brushing off too. Can we brush off our arms? Just big, sloppy, messy, heavy brushing. Like you're brushing off some kind of lint or sand or cat hair, dust. The cat is watching me, like, what are you saying about cat hair? Other side. Big brushing, palm of your hand against the bones of the arm. Kind of calm your nervous system. Tell your nervous system, hey, it's okay. Let's do the chest, flat of the palm, just flat, going down the front of the body, very neutrally. And go down the torso, stomach, down the legs. You can do the thighs. You can get up if it's easier. At any point in class, you can stand up to do any of these things. Also, I want to say that it's fine to do these things however it makes sense for you. There's no right way. You can brush down the legs while I talk to you. I don't know if I can show you easily, but here. Have some brushing on the legs. And you can do this from your seat or standing, whatever makes more sense. Front of the leg, back of the leg, sides, knee, other leg. Make sure you do both. Sides, front and back of the lower leg. Let's brush off the feet too. Can you brush off your feet? You can do this sitting in your chair. You can do it standing. You can cross one leg over the other, whatever is easier. Okay. And as I was saying, I want to remind you that it's okay to adapt anything to how you need it today. So if you need to change things, adapt them, take care of yourselves in whatever way you need to. Let's do a little bit of breathing too. That would be useful probably. So let's hold the head. Let's again think about what we talked about last time, the bone against bone contact. So palms of the hand on the skull. You can hold the sides or you can hold the front and back or whatever feels more comfortable to you. You find a version that feels good. If you have a lot of tension here, you may want to hold the front. And let's send some breath into this area. So you're going to breathe in 4 counts in. And then let's exhale for 4. And when you breathe in, send the air into the hands, into the skull. So let's breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's exhale on 4. You can change your hands and let's try it again. And let's change your hands and try it again. So each time you change your hands is a bit of an experiment. You can just see where it feels better for you. Some of you are doing a little bit of a light touch. I'd like to ask you to really use your full palm and give it some pressure against the skull. So you're really thinking of like the full, yeah, that's it. The full palm of the hand against the skull, front or back. So let's take a nice big breath in on 4 and breathe out on 4. And you can hiss the air out if that's easier for you. And let's try one more. Really sending the breath into the hands, into the skull, and breathe out on 4 counts. And now let's focus a little lower down. You're going to think about this point. I think we dealt with this last time. 4 fingers below your navel. So you can use 4 fingers if that helps you. And let's find the point 4 fingers below your navel. Put your hand there or a finger there or something there to remind you of where that is. And let's breathe into that. We'll breathe in for 4, and then we'll gradually let the air exhale for 4, breathing into that point. You can hiss it out too if it's easier. See if you can really send the air down that low into the body, down to that point 4 fingers below your navel. Can you breathe into that point? Can you send the breath there? And then exhale for 4. Let's take one more, really filling the lower stomach and the pelvis with air. Great. And I just want to remind you that these are really simple things that you can do almost any time, right? You can always remember to breathe. It's good to remember to breathe. So you can be in another meeting or class and you can be like, yeah, I need some air down there in my stomach. I'm not breathing. It's all up here. So you can just kind of put your finger there and remind yourself, or, you know, hold your head a little bit for a moment. But these are things that you have available to you. These are tools. Let's just move the body a little bit just to kind of wake yourself up. I know some people are maybe not feeling as physically embodied these days. So let's imagine that you have a searchlight on top of your head. It can be like a bright white light, like a headlamp, or it can be a nice color if you want something special for you, whatever it helps you to imagine. But imagine you have a searchlight on top of your head. And let's make some circles on the ceiling with that light. So what would it be like to make circles with the light, knowing that the light is coming out of the top of your head, right? Can you make some circles, some smaller circles on your ceiling? Imagine that you see the light. Maybe you imagine being in a darker room where you can kind of see how this light is moving on the ceiling, what pattern it makes. And after you've made a whole bunch of circles, can you go the other way and make circles in the other direction? So can you use this light to make the circles? So you're not thinking so much about your neck. You're not thinking so much about your head. You're just really imagining this light making these circles. And what if the circles start to get bigger? Can they get bigger? What does it take to make the circles bigger? How do you make your circles of light bigger? What kinds of changes do you make in the body to get them bigger? And you can go the other way as well. Remember, you can always reverse. You can always not listen to me, and you can make figure eights or heart shapes or other things. It doesn't have to be a circle. And how do you now start to make these circles so big that they go down to the wall? What would it take to make circles around the walls of your room or wherever you are, the space you're in? How do you have to move? Can you move in such a way that you're making circles on the walls? And remember, you can go the other way at any time. You don't have to get stuck in one direction. And can you now start to make circles on the ground as well? How do you do that? How do you make really large circles around your chair, around where you're sitting, on the ground? How do you have to move your body or your head? You can even get up if you need to get up. But can you make these circles? And now just take a moment to kind of freestyle. So you can freestyle however you like with your spotlight, with your searchlight. Now can you go wherever you like with the searchlight? Can you make whatever patterns in the room you'd like? Maybe on the ceiling, maybe on the walls, maybe it goes down, down, down onto the floor and then all the way back up again and over. What kind of large or small patterns do you feel like making with your own searchlight? And as you continue, and you can go slower or quicker as feels good for you. You can really decide on your own tempo. Can you add a hum? We did a lot of humming last time. So can you just add a hum to this? So as you're doing your searchlight, you're humming. I know it's kind of weird, but we're in a time that's very weird. Everything is weird right now. This is nothing, you know? It's like, so just try it out. So you can hum while you're moving your searchlight and see how that feels. It may slow you down a little. You may have to go slower. That's okay. You want to stand up? And let's rest. Okay, good. So remember, you've got these tools also. Humming. Humming is a great tool. Vibration is really great. It keeps you from getting too tense, too anxious, too kind of like stuck. And searchlight is great. If you're on the computer and you're always forward, you can face behind you, face to the sides of you, so you don't get too physically just stuck in that forward dimension. Great. So For this next thing that we're going to do, I'd like to try it ideally lying down. If you have a little space near whatever your device is where you can lie down on the floor, you can do that. If not, or if it's not comfortable, or if it's too cold on the floor, you can stay seated, but it just might be easier if you're lying down. So in terms of thinking about your doing this more easily, I would suggest lying down if you can. Make sure you're somewhere close enough that you can still hear me. And if not, someone get up and shout at me so I know no one's hearing me. Yeah, you can put something down on the ground if you need to, under you. Let's see if you can find a spot that you're comfortable in. And wherever you are, just take a moment to do a little quick scan of the body. You don't have to change anything, but you can see if you're holding tension anywhere. And I recommend trying to lie in a position that's symmetrical if you can, maybe lying on your back. You can lie in a big X with your arms and your legs out. Or you can lie on your back with your feet on the ground and your knees pointed up toward the ceiling and your arms at your sides, or some other position that feels comfortable. Make sure that you're not in a place that stresses your back, that makes your back, your lower back hurt in any way. And let's just take one or two of these big breaths that we just did down there on the ground. See what it's like to do them down there. So you can take a nice big breath in and you can hiss the air out down there from your place on the ground. Just take another two of those on your own time. And as you hiss the air out, you can continue on your own time. You can allow yourself to sink down into the ground. You feel like you're sinking into the earth. And remember that the earth is under you and is supporting you, and you don't have to do anything to be lying here. And as we continue, you can always do the breathing and the hissing at any point if you feel like it. So as you're here, I'd like you to imagine that the body begins to transform into a landscape. How can you imagine that this thing that is your body that you know so well also starts to become a landscape? In your mind's eye, can you see parts of it changing? Can you see parts of it becoming geological formations? Maybe there are parts of the body that become mountains or valleys or cliffs or sandy beaches or even islands. What form would this landscape of your body take? And what kind of land is it? Can you imagine what kind of land your body becomes? Does it become rocky, or does it become rich soil? Does it become volcanic stone? Does it become sand? And maybe different parts of the landscape are different things, right? Are there valleys? Are there fields? Are there meadows? Are there dry areas? Are there deserts? What is there in these different parts of the body? What aspects of this landscape are there? And are there bodies of water? Where is there water in this landscape? Are there rivers? Are there oceans? Are there oceans in the middle or oceans at the sides that lap on the sides of the landscape? Are there ponds or lakes or streams or deltas or swamps? What kinds of water populate this landscape in different ways, different areas? And what kinds of vegetation are there on this landscape? Can you imagine that there's some vegetation, that there are trees, maybe there are forests, Maybe there are bushes and brush. Maybe there are meadows. What kinds of vegetation grow in different areas? What are the temperatures in these different areas? Are there places that are tropical? Are there places that are cold? Is there polar ice in your landscape? And what about creatures, living things? What kinds of living things populate this landscape? So you might think on the very smallest scale about the kinds of things that live in the earth, different kinds of bacteria and fungus and small insects. And you might also think about larger creatures, animals, birds, fish. What kinds of living things live and move in these different parts of your landscape? And what about people? Are there humans in this landscape? Are there populations of humans? Are they concentrated in cities? Or are they spread out? And I'd like you to see what the movement of this landscape feels like. What is the movement that happens in this landscape? Maybe there are different natural phenomena that create movement. Maybe there's migration that creates movement. What kinds of movement occur on a regular basis in your landscape? And how does that maybe make your own body begin to move in some way? Maybe there are some small movements that begin to happen. They might be visible, they might not be visible. Maybe your body shifts or rocks or rolls or turns or changes its configuration or creeps along the ground. Maybe your body just flattens or sinks into the ground more, spreads out, becomes wider, becomes flatter. Maybe your arms move or your feet in response to the movement that is a part of this landscape. And now I'd like to invite you to imagine something. And I want to remind you that you should do this as is okay for you. You get to choose how to do this. Only do what feels safe or comfortable for yourself. But imagine that there's some sort of disaster in your landscape. I know you guys read an article about disaster recovery, and I watched the video that Helen made about it. So you've been thinking about these things. You've been thinking about disasters like COVID, extreme weather, other kinds of human and natural disaster that overtake the landscape. But can you imagine that there's some kind of disaster in your landscape? It might be populations that are suffering from COVID, or it might be flooding, hurricanes, fires. It's something that creates a certain amount of shift and destruction in your landscape. How does that feel? How does that make the landscape move or change? Does the body move in response? What is it like when this landscape changes in this way? When there's some sort of disaster that changes it physically or otherwise? How does it lead to some shift in the moving of the body? How does it lead to some change in how that landscape feels somatically, kinesthetically? Does it lead you to move your hands, your arms, your head? Does it lead you to roll or to turn or to flatten? Or maybe it leads you to be immobile. This disaster in your landscape, maybe it leads you to stop moving. There's no right answer. Now I'd like you to think about the kinds of disaster recovery that you've been reading about and speaking about. Think about what recovery would mean. What would recovery mean or look like or be in this landscape? Can you imagine that this landscape of the body begins to recover? And how do you imagine that recovery? It might not mean going back to what it was before. It might look different. It might feel different. But what would recovery feel like in this landscape? Maybe it involves some of the things that you've read about. Maybe it involves networks, training for all different kinds of people. Maybe it involves gender equity. Maybe it involves sustainable livelihoods. Maybe it involves creating sustainable parts of the landscape, sustainable use of the landscape. Maybe it involves reformation of parts of this landscape. But what would recovery feel like and look like in this body, in this landscape? Can you now take some time to envision recovery? What does recovery mean to you physically right here, right now? And can you not be bound by what you think are the limits of reality? How can you allow this recovery to be as full and rich and promising and successful as you would like it to be? How can you imagine this landscape in a recovered state, in a healthy state, in a positive state? What does that feel like in the body? How does it lead your body to move? Are there any movements, large or small, that this sense of recovery creates? Does it lead the body to roll, to shift, to rock? Does it lead the arms to change their position or to move in space? Does this feeling of recovery change how you have your legs, whether they're on the ground, whether your feet are touching the floor? Does this feeling of recovery affect how you move your head? Does it change what parts of you are touching the ground? Whether you're moving at all, or how quickly you're moving? What is a feeling of recovery in your body? What does that feel like? Where do you locate that feeling? And how does it make you move? We're just going to take like 30 seconds more to just live in that feeling of recovery, see what that's like physically. What does it mean? Does it mean different parts of your landscape are connected in different ways? Does it mean something about how the human populations are moving throughout the landscape? Does it mean something about the formations of the landscape? The water, the vegetation, are they different? Take a last moment to scan the body, see what recovery feels like. And then let's come to rest. And if you've had your eyes closed, you can open your eyes. Go around the space. And then come back to join us by your device. Great. So welcome back. I want to shift gears a little to tell you about a project that I've been working on. So I know you've been doing a lot of work in the last week or two thinking about this idea of environmental justice and what that is. And I want to tell you about something that I started to learn about recently because it's a really interesting example of that. I found it interesting. It's a project that's called Renewable Rikers. and it's actually a proposal for the future of Rikers Island in New York City. So do people know what Rikers Island is? I know we have some New Yorkers here, but how many people have heard of Rikers Island? Yeah. Can anyone say what it is? Can someone unmute and tell us what it is?
It's a island in the East River that I think has a jail complex on it. And what else can I say about it? I honestly don't know. I live in New York City, but I don't know that much about it.
Yeah. No, but that's great. Thank you. Leah, you got the basics. So yeah, exactly what Leah said. It has a complex of 9 jails, and it's notoriously a violent place, and a place that has been really, oppressive to many people who have been held there. Population there is primarily Black and brown people from certain low-income neighborhoods in New York City. It's a place where there's been a lot of violence against the people who are being held there. There's been a lot of deaths of people who are held there. There's also been suicides by people who are held there. So there's been for many years a lot of abuse and violence. I also want to point out, as Leah said, it's a jail, not a prison. So that's kind of an interesting distinction to be aware of. It's a place where people are being held before they're sentenced. So no one who's being held there has already been sentenced. These are people who've been arrested. They're being held before trial. So all of this detention and all of this, this abuse is happening before anyone has even received a sentence. So there's now a plan. I don't know if you guys have heard about this or not, but there's a plan to close Rikers. And that would happen, well, it will happen. It's supposedly a definite plan by 2026. It's just like, who knows how all of what's going on will affect anything. But by 2026, the idea is to close Rikers as a jail complex. And the solution is, is mixed, and people have very different views about that. There's this idea of creating new and smaller jails in all boroughs. So the population of Rikers would be moved and dispersed. You can debate about that a lot if you don't think that's a good idea. It's really worth looking at the prison abolition movement in general right now. If you haven't heard about that, check it out. But leaving that question aside of what should happen to people who have been held on Rikers, there's also a question about what will happen to the land. What happens to this island after the prison is closed and after people have been moved off the island. I should also add that this closure of Rikers is the product of a tremendous amount of activism by all different kinds of groups, and particularly prison reform groups, but also groups that are all different kinds of community organizations from neighborhoods that are like feeder neighborhoods for Rikers. So there's been a lot of tremendous amount of activism in the last few years. That is on the heels of what was a really important study by this commission called the Littman Commission. It came out of basically a statement by Preet Bharara in 2014 that acknowledged that this was a human rights offense, what was happening on the island, that this was really intensely problematic and was not okay. And that led to the creation of this commission, which studied the human rights offenses on the island. They found out what people knew. They published what people knew, which was what I told you about what was happening, how many people were being hurt and dying by prison guards and by the conditions. And then that led to a kind of wave of activism like that. That commission was, I know you guys are looking at how do things happen, right? How do things change? And often there are many different pieces that kind of come together. So it's interesting because there was this policy piece that was really mixed with a grassroots activism piece that led to this, real mandate to close the island. So anyway, they're going to close it. There are 400 acres of land. And the big question is what will happen? And as you can imagine, in New York City, this land is highly sought after, as is all land, even though it will probably be underwater in, I don't know, by 2050 for certain. But One of the proposals is called Renewable Rikers. And the idea is to turn the island into a site for the production of solar energy and energy storage. And that is an interesting idea from an environmental standpoint, obviously, from an energy standpoint. But that could be something that's done still in a very, very consumer-oriented, very capitalist way that is not, you know, helping the communities that basically the people on Rikers are coming from. So this proposal, they didn't want that to happen. They wanted to block that possibility. So this proposal entails a really interesting piece, which basically says, because of the additional energy that's being produced on this island, you know, the energy produced on this island is going to offset energy that's produced in other parts of the city. And therefore we can close these peaker plants, what are called peaker plants. So there are 11 peaker plants, particularly in low income frontline communities that are mostly Black and brown people in outer boroughs like the Bronx and Queens. And these peaker plants are plants that operate at peak times of peak usage. So like, you know, in the middle of the summer when it's super hot and everyone's got their AC on and they're using all kinds of devices and the city doesn't have enough energy, these peaker plants kick in. But it happens that these peaker plants are particularly, they're dirty, so to speak. Like they are more polluting than a lot of other forms of energy generation. They apparently emit more carbon dioxide into the air, and they're very polluting of the air in the neighborhoods that they're in. And these are neighborhoods where many people have asthma, many people have other health concerns, and this is like the perfect storm of like basically, you know, it's an environmental justice nightmare, right? It's the kind of environmental racism that you've been reading about, where, you know, these toxic and air polluting plants are put into neighborhoods where there are health conditions that are related to the ways people live because of their income, because of their race, and so on. So anyway, the idea is that with the extra energy that's being produced on Rikers, these 11 peaker plants that have existed in the city for almost 20 years now can be closed. And that would mean a number of kind of justice outcomes or remedies of the harm that has been going on in a number of different ways. First of all, it would take away these polluting plants from these neighborhoods that are the neighborhoods that people on Rikers have come from traditionally for many, many years. So that would hopefully affect the health impacts and the health outcomes of people in those parts of the city. Secondly, these peaker plants are very large, and it would free up the footprint of each of these plants so that this land could be used by those neighborhoods. The neighborhoods could self-determine and decide how, in some positive way, this could be community space. Maybe it would be community green space, maybe it would be low-income housing, but there would suddenly be space that could come back to those communities, which in New York is a big deal. And third, there would be the creation of jobs in the renewable energy sector for people from those communities. So the jobs on Rikers would be designated or earmarked, so to speak, for people coming from those communities who would be trained in new professional skills and be working in the energy sector. So it's an interesting plan, and there are 3 ordinances that are before the New York City Council right now that are kind of about moving this forward in some way. So the first is simply to shift the title of the island from the Department of Parks, from the Department of Corrections, who owns it now, to the Department of Parks. So that would mean that no matter what happens, it would never be able to go back to being a jail. The Department of Corrections would lose its access to that island. So that's the first thing that they're trying to get the City Council to pass. The second thing is about a large study that would basically study how to do this. You know, how can they do this, and how can these communities be involved early and often in the planning of this project. So there's this idea again of communities self-determining. What do the communities need? What do they want to see? This comes out of a lot of grassroots work with these communities, talking to people about what they want to see as the future of that island and what they want to see when Rikers closes. So how can that work be continued for what you've probably been hearing about? It's called a just transition. right? So it's not just this idea coming from the top down. It's not just this thing of like, oh, great, now someone's going to make money off of solar power, but how can these communities be involved in this, this evolution? So the study would figure out how to do that, and it would also already be starting to get input from the communities. And then there's a third ordinance, which I couldn't find. I'm not sure what the text of the third ordinance before the city council is, but there are 3 pieces that they're trying to get passed now, this real estate. So an alternative proposal on the table is making another runway for JFK Airport. And of course, there are people who want to make it into luxury condos or want to make it into some other kind of housing, real estate, retail kind of situation. So, so it's not a done deal, but it's a proposal that is gaining a lot of traction right now, and it's worth knowing about and following, and it's also worth telling people about it so that if you think it's interesting, it can gain more traction. So let's see, I think that's all I wanted to say about it. But you can, there's some stuff I sent Helen, and you can get some materials about it afterwards. If you want to read more, you can Google renewable Rikers to read more. But I guess before we go on and do any kind of movement work around this, I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, I want to hear if you have any thoughts about what you just heard. But secondly, I want to ask you what you think about this idea of renewable. What does renewable, what does the word renewable even mean? It's an interesting word that they chose, right? It's got multi-layers. That's why they chose that name for it. But what does this word renewable mean to you guys? So don't wait for me to
Olivia has her hand up.
Yeah, go for it. Just go.
I guess this is more of a question. I was just thinking about like how obviously it's beneficial to be repurposing Rikers Island in New York, and like this all sounds really great. I'm just thinking about like there are other parts of New York also where people are living that are like in a lot of danger for a lot of the same reasons as Rikers Island, like the South Bronx, where like half of the population's under the poverty line, and like the rates of asthma are significantly higher than the rest of the city. And if, I guess maybe it's just a separate issue, but it sounds like a lot of the same issues are trying to be addressed. And I'm just curious about like, not that one should be prioritized over the other, but if there's a way for those problems to be, like if Rikers Island can be kind of a model for how the South Bronx can maybe be like improved environmentally, like with an environmental justice lens, or if, you know, maybe there's work that needs to be done in the South Bronx first before putting all this energy into like a piece of land where that's kind of just like open, or if you have thoughts about that. I'm not sure if that was a clear question, but that was just something I was thinking about.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, that's great, Olivia. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this project is actually very much meant to address the things you're raising. And, you know, a lot of the communities that it's targeted at are in the South Bronx, right? So the idea is that the solar energy that would be put on Rikers would allow for changes to happen in the South Bronx to improve life for some people, given a number of these problems that we're talking about. As you're saying, like, there's a million communities that need this kind of support, right? That need, you know, support environmentally, that need like toxic and polluting sources removed from the community. There are waste transfer stations and other kinds of things besides peaker plants in so many communities. So this is not going to necessarily address the needs of all of those communities, but it will actually get to some of these really core ones, because the peaker plants are in some of the places that have been hit the worst by all of these issues. This kind of like layered issue of like poverty and profiling, incarceration, economic issues, environmental issues. Like, so some of those areas that you're talking about in the South Bronx will be kind of affected by this. And then, as you say, I think this is an interesting thing in that it could be used as a model for best practices, right? So like, if this works, and this is a way to kind of solve 2 problems at once, like deal with land that's available and deal with like the rehabilitation or renewal of communities, how could that be spread to other areas even where there's not a Rikers, right? Like, what can we learn from this so that, you know, this model could be replicated, or it could be varied in different ways or adapted. And I think that's just a farther out question that people, would love to address, but it's like they first even want to get like to base one, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Does
Also,
that
just a
speak to your
follow-up.
question?
Yeah, absolutely. That was helpful. Just kind of a quick follow-up question. Do you think that it's realistic that these people that are interested in rehabilitating the land are going to win out over the real estate people that have the money to put luxury condos in?
I know, I have the same worry. I don't know. I am not enough of an expert on the kind of the internal real estate politics of New York City to really know that. You need a lot of like insider knowledge to know that. I do know someone who's like I know a number of activists involved, but I also know someone who's been part of like testifying before city council, who's a law professor who's connected with AOC. AOC is very much behind this project now. And she's like really hopeful. So I feel like she knows much more about like the kind of inner workings of city council and stuff. So I feel like, maybe there is hope for it. I don't know.
Cool. Thanks.
Mackenzie?
What do other people say?
Mackenzie has her hand up.
Something that I thought was really interesting and important that you brought up was being able to give these people in the communities jobs, like kind of build like capacity building. How, from a policy standpoint, can that be ensured instead of just a big solar company coming in and kind of doing their job?
Right. I think it's part of first of all, the title is going to, parks or something, right? So parks is going to have control of this land. And then I don't know exactly in terms of like, again, I'm not in city government, so I don't know how, where this would get written, whether it's written like into the bill or it's written into some other piece of the legislation, but apparently it would get written in, like it should be baked in. It wouldn't be just like an open call for anyone who wants to propose to run the island, right? I don't know. I would suggest if that's something you're interested in, I think that's a really cool question. And it could be great to kind of get involved with it in some way to kind of see what those inner workings are like and how things like that can get insured. And I don't know, I would suggest thinking about an internship with city council at some point, right?
There are also, Mackenzie, there are also some case studies, not from the US, but there's specifically one from Germany that I'm familiar with, and I can, once I get access to my office, or I could also email Professor Mary Alice Haddad, but Germany is an example of where so I like kind of like bringing this to the larger kind of thought of like what Olivia said as well, like how does this go from like a NIMBY thing, which is like not in my backyard, to a NABY thing, which is like not in anyone's backyard kind of phenomenon. You can see that grassroots environmental protests actually can be quite effective, and in terms of thinking about technology transfer. And there's a German case when they started to phase out there were proposals prior to the Fukushima incident in Germany before they transitioned using the energy wind as this way to transition towards renewables. There were proposals to put nuclear power plants into certain parts of Germany. And in fact, what happened was that grassroots environmental protests ensued. And what went in instead was renewable energy. So of a variety of different forms. And so, so to your point, Mackenzie, it's sort of thinking about capacity building and technology transfer, right? And so not just training, like training people to be skilled workers in renewables. And then also the idea that you can have these like long-term sort of outcomes that are more sustainable. And that mechanism can be through grassroots environmental protest. And so, I mean, there are examples of this. And this, in fact, would be such an example that could be used and applied to other urban communities, both like in the New York area, but also outside of it.
I think also, Mackenzie, I think your question kind of has two layers to it. Like one is sort of how do you officially ensure that these things are pieces of the, the solution, right? So there's like a legislation piece, right? Like how does it get written so that like this is what's going to happen? It's not just going to be a commercial enterprise, but there's like an insurance that the company will give a certain amount of profit to these communities in some form. They will hire a certain number of workers from these communities, da, da, da. How does it get baked in? But then there's a further question about enforcement, right? Like, even if you try to bake it in, like, how do you guarantee that then that's really going to happen? And that's like an endless struggle, right? And an organization that you all should know about, which does really great work, is We Act, W-E Act, We Act. There are many chapters, but there's a New York chapter that's based in Harlem, and they've been doing a lot of work that's sort of related to this, and they're behind this Renewable Rikers project as well. And they're real experts at this. Like, they've had a lot of struggles with this where, there are negotiations with some sort of company, or especially with Columbia University, with issues of eminent domain. And, some of their settlements involve like creating jobs for a certain number of people from the community. And there's been like constant struggle, for them to get those agreements enforced. So even once there's an agreement, once there's bargaining, there's some kind of written agreement, like just getting it to be enforced and getting whoever is running things to hire people from the community in practice has been a struggle that grassroots organizations are like intensely engaged in. Yeah, Leah.
I'm also curious what this means to more of like an emotional and psychological level. If you're having this land that was and still is kind of occupied by mostly, like as you're saying, brown and black peoples who are incarcerated there, and then having, as they leave, having more minority communities kind of take over that land. Because there's lots of kind of histories of that violence in that land that they're going to be occupying. So I'm curious
what do you mean? I just want to make sure that I'm sorry. I want to make sure you're understanding. What do you mean by take over that land, though, just to clarify?
Yeah, no, not take over that land. I just, by that I meant that if Renewable Rikers is employing mostly people from like lower income minority communities in New York City, and employing them to like work on the like solar panel or whatever renewable technologies will be there. I'm curious what the significance, or if there's any like emotional effects that would cause. I mean, I think this is an incredible idea, just something that I was wondering about, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally understand what you're saying now, right? And it's like, what is it to, employ? And employment shouldn't be underrated, right? I mean, employment is really different from incarceration, but what is it to employ the same communities on the same land? And, when is it good and when is it the new Jim Crow? And so that's a real question. I think Leah's question feeds exactly into this thing that I want to do next. So I'm going to just, because our time together is limited, I'm going to move us along. But I'm also happy to talk with people more about this after. And I want to ask you to reflect on the kinds of things that Leah's actually questioning, and I'm sure many of you are questioning right now. I share the thoughts, like it's a great proposal in a lot of ways, and it's great that there's this kind of like feedback loop in it, right? It's not just about like we're moving forward and we're forgetting what's happened here. We want to like create some kind of remedy for the harms that have been happening here. But there are all kinds of questions too that come up around this and the complexities of this, like emotionally, politically, maybe for some spiritually, right? People have died there. Like, I don't know, in many ways, there are questions. So I'd like to give you the option or opportunity to write a letter. It's gonna be a short letter. You're gonna take 3 minutes. But in the next 3 minutes, I'd like you to write a letter to the island. And you can construe that however you like. You can be speaking to the land, you can be speaking to the island in some broader sense, whatever version of this you want to do. But can you write a letter to the island? And, a letter can be many things, right? I mean, it could be words, but it might be that you have some images or diagrams or maps or just lists or anything you want to make. It doesn't need to be beautiful narrative prose. A letter can be a statement, but it can also be a question, right? You may have questions for the island. It might not be like, I'm going to tell you. You might want to just try to imagine what that island is feeling like, or you might want to raise your concerns, or represent your fellow humans, or I don't know. You could write from the point of view of you, or from the point of view of New York, or from the point of view of humans in general, or certain kinds of humans and certain identity groups that you're part of. I don't know. But take 3 minutes, and with whatever kind of devices you like to use, you can just write something, write a letter to the island, okay? If you guys have questions, you can say. I'm gonna set my timer for us. Okay, so that was 3 minutes. So you can always come back to this if you're interested. You can always finish this or write a new letter or a longer letter or daily letters or whatever. But with whatever you have and whatever else you're thinking about and is inside you and swirling around, I'd like you to now take 1 minute to say your letter in movement. So you can turn your camera off if you want. You don't have to worry about us. You can go somewhere off camera. You can just turn off your video. But you're going to have 1 minute to just say your letter in movement. Can you get up out of your chair? If you want, you can even do it in your chair, but I suggest just getting up. And what would it be like to say your letter in movement? You can say the things that are in the letter. You can say stuff you didn't manage to say in the letter. But what is it like to write this letter in movement, or to say your letter in movement? So take 1 minute, I'm gonna set my alarm, and you've got 1 minute to move in any way that feels right to you. Hey, that was 1 minute, you guys. So come on back. That was 1 minute. So again, this is something you can always come back to. If it interests you, you can do more of it on your own time, but let's come back. And I'd like to write another letter. I'm thinking 3 minutes is a little long. I'm gonna give you a little less for this one. But now I'd like you to write a letter from the island to you. So what is the island's response? What do you think the island would respond? Can you imagine your way into the island? So can you write a letter from the island back to you in response to your letter? So let's take 2 minutes to write another letter, or part of a letter, or a diagram of a letter, or a draft of a letter, or an image, or whatever it is that is for you the response of the island. Okay, so let's pause in your letter and just pause. Again, this is something you can always come back to, or you can even, if you're interested in something like this, you can consider like a letter writing project, right? Where every day you write a letter, or every week you write a letter to someone or something. So you have a form that can be iterative, right? It can go on over a longer duration. It doesn't have to all be now. So let's move this one too. How would you say this letter in movement? How would you write this letter in movement? So take a minute, you can go off camera again, but take a minute to say this letter in movement, or other things that didn't make it into the letter. Okay, so come on back. Come on back to join us. And we're gonna do one last letter, but I wanna wait till more people are back, or I know that you're back. Let's see. You guys with us? Great. So, so we're going to do one last letter, and this one sort of relates to kind of a little bit to the question that Leah raised. You know, environmental justice or an environmental justice project or an environmental justice goal or outcome is not something for you to decide alone, right? It's not something for anyone to decide alone. It should be decided in communication with people who are affected by the issue, right? And communities that are affected by the issue. So that means that people who are affected need to be consulted early and often in any kind of process or project to kind of hear like, yeah, what do the people affected by this injustice think? What do they want? What are the solutions they envision? How do they see the island being used in this way by the same populations? You know, in new ways, but by the same people, or whatever the questions are. There are many questions that can be asked, like how do people who want to be involved in environmental justice projects but are not directly affected, how do those of us who do that have the humility to understand who needs to say what should happen? So I think that means asking a lot of questions, right? And this next letter is going to be maybe mostly questions, but I want to ask, like, who do you think you should ask? Who do you think you should consult about this project? And can you write a letter to that person or one of those people or to a group of people? Can you write a letter to ask some questions? What are some of the questions you would like to ask one person or many people who are affected? Maybe you'd like to ask someone who's been held at Rikers something. Maybe you'd like to ask someone who grew up in a certain neighborhood something. Maybe you'd like to ask a political leader or a religious leader something. I don't know, up to you, right? But pick someone you'd like to consult, knowing it's not the only person you're going to consult, that if you were working on this project, there would be many others. But just for today, for this tiny moment, who would you like to consult? What would you like to ask them? You can write a letter to them for the next 2 minutes. Okay. Okay, so let's take a break from your letter And this last one too, we're just gonna move. How can you write your letter in movement? How can you just take 1 minute to move, to say your letter in movement? And maybe this one has a lot of questions. So what is it like to ask a question in movement? It's an interesting question. How do you ask these questions in movement? So just take 1 minute. Okay, so that's a minute. So come on back. Come on back. And welcome back. We have a choice. We have 5 minutes left. So I want to ask you how you want to spend it. We can do some breakout groups so you can talk to your classmates and colleagues about the experience you just had a little bit and process it. Or we can do one last little tiny kind of exercise that comes from the work of Pauline Oliveros. So what do you think? Quick, non-scientific vote. What do you guys want to do?
Option one, or option one?
Yeah.
Hand?
Option one? Anyone for breakouts? A little bit, yeah. Option two?
Or option two? Okay, the two have it. More exercise.
More twos? Okay.
I think there were
All
more
right.
hands up. So.
Yeah, I hope you guys get a chance to chat about your experiences. Maybe in your next class, you can take a few minutes to chat a little.
Yeah, we can start the next class period with a short breakout. To talk about.
And if you do that, I would pose the question to you, was there anything that you noticed or that surprised you about your own responses, or did you have any new thoughts or new realizations, either by writing the letters or by saying the letters in movement? You know, were there things that occurred to you or surprised you when you decided to approach this issue that way, instead of like just when we were talking about it? So anyway, yeah, the last thing that we'll do is this sort of exercise is actually a piece. It's called a piece. It's a performance we're going to do together online by a woman named Pauline Oliveros. I don't know if have people heard of Pauline Oliveros? Anyone?
Nora
Pauline,
said yes.
Cool.
Okay.
Pauline, yeah, we've got a yes, at least one. We've got one person. Pauline was a composer and a performer, musician. She was kind of a grandmother of electronic music in a lot of ways, and was working in electronic music way before, way early in the history of electronic music, and way before other women were in electronic music. And she also innovated a method or a practice that she called deep listening, which is really interesting, which involves just that, a lot of listening, and sort of tuning our ears to what's happening around us. And also sounding, some of the kind of humming and things like that that we've done have been related to that work. And she has like many, many movement scores that have been performed as pieces, where a score is basically just a set of directions, and it's something you do. And when you do those directions, you've performed the piece. So, I also, before we do the piece, I want to tell you that she died kind of recently. So there are many people alive and working now who've still worked with her until recently. She was born in 1932 and she died in 2016. So she's not, someone who's like in the distant past. She's someone who's been very much having an impact on the field of music until very recently. So anyway, the piece I want to do though is not recent. It's from 1980, and it's called "We Could." And basically, you just fill in the blank and end that sentence. So each person starts, or no, I guess we start at once. I say "we could," and then each person fills in how they would like to end that sentence. So I say "we could," and then like Helen would say something, and then Nora would say something, and then someone else would say something, and you would end the sentence however you would like to end the sentence. And when each person has ended the sentence, the piece is over. Does that make sense? I feel like I didn't do a great job of explaining it, but you guys following? Give me something. Give me a thumbs up or something. I can't tell what's happening out there. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to do the piece. So should we do it in any kind of order, or should we do it popcorn style? I've never done it on Zoom. I don't know if anyone has done it on Zoom. So this might be a historical performance. What do you think? Someone tell me how you think we should do it.
Well, I think we probably have to popcorn it because there's no
order, right?
Because everyone sees a different order. Yeah. Cool. So let's do that. All right. So, but we've got to all do it. So we have to know when it's over. So keep track so that you can know when the piece is over. Okay. So we could.
Dance.
Every day.
In.
Wait. I'm sorry. I'm confused, you guys. What's happening? I think each person, it's not like a Mad Libs. It's like each person complete the sentence how you want to complete the sentence. You can, if you just want to say in and that's your poetic choice, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that you know what your options are.
I see what's going on here. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll do the first one and then you each do your own version. So like, we could change the future of Rikers Island.
Do you say again then we could? Like, do I say we could or do I just?
You don't have to. You can just, you can just do the answer part.
Okay, we could breathe and meditate every day.
We could start right now.
We could listen to communities.
We could be more mindful.
We could vote.
We could breathe fresh air.
We could attune ourselves with the environment.
We could dance.
We'd learn more.
We can.
Say it again, Megan. We didn't hear you. You're mute.
We could go for a walk.
We could experiment with what renew means. Did everyone go?
Everyone went.
Everyone went? Okay.
All right, congratulations. You have now performed Julino Oliveros' We Could in, what is it, 12 locations. And we're just gonna leave it here for today. But thank you so much for being open and participating.